Let's discuss ACT reading. As we go through this, let me discuss our metaphor. There's a need to do well on the test to open more doors of opportunity. There are tools you've developed, knowing English, knowing your arithmetic, knowing basics of science, understanding vocabulary, the ability to read well. Those are all the tools you have. The capabilities are the strategy, speed, and efficiency with which you can approach the test, and that's why we need to spend time understanding how the test works. Remember, the other metaphor is taking the vehicle you're in, what you're dealing with your skills and abilities. Some of you are fast and flashy, you miss things. Others of you are slow and practical. Some of you have other issues you may be dealing with. But taking that vehicle and learn to approach the roadmap your own. Figure out the best strategy for you to get to point A to point B, not only on the test, but also on your goals of where you want to be because of the test. I want you to be able to approach this test like tying your shoes. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect at the answers, but you at least go into the test knowing your strategies and how to approach it. You don't have to think about tying your shoes. I don't want you to have to think about how to approach the reading test. You'll know that going into it. So the basic thing you need to know first, there are 40 questions on the reading test. They're divided into 4 passages, one of which is a dual passage. You have a passage A and passage B, and you have 35 minutes in which to complete it. One of the stressors of the ACT is the speed of the test. In order to finish the test, students need to be able to read at a rate of about 280 words per minute, and most students simply cannot read this quickly and need a strategy to complete the test. So think of it kind of like comprehensive skimming, skimrehending. You're not reading to understand everything. You're just reading to get through the test and have those tools based on the vehicle you're in. Now the test itself is the third test. So you've taken English and math, been in the testing room for over 2 hours, and then you have a break, and then the reading test is next. And so the good thing is you have a break just before the reading test. Now remember, the goal of the test is not to finish, it's to maximize correct answers. And since speed and your own abilities are part of the considerations, you have to look at where you want to be. If you're looking to score a 36, of course you need to get all 40 questions, do 40 passages. 32 questions, you need to get 34 to 37. You can letter the day, guess on 6 questions, guess the same letter. It's about 3.5 passages. So if you can do 3.5 passages, you can get 32-ish. If you're looking to get a 30, you can just do 3 passages. If you can get all the questions right on 3 passages, guess on 10, statistically you should get a couple of those. You'll get around a 30, 29, maybe a 31. 25, you can do 2.5 passages. A 22, 2 passages. Anything below 2 passages, you're probably going to get a 21 or below. Numbers are based on score charts from multiple ACT tests. So you can see these are to get a 36, you see 36 on the end, and you can look across and see what you need to score at a particular score point. So if you're really interested in this, pause the video and look at this particular slide. So if you are looking at standard timing, you have about 8.5 minutes per test. And if you're using your watch as a stopwatch, you're going to set your minute hand at the 25-minute mark so that it ends on the 12-minute mark. You can keep track of time. And then you will see that you can know about where you need to be on every passage as you move on. But again, depending on how many passages you're going to complete will depend on about how much time you have. So 36 score, 40 questions, you have about 8.25 minutes per passage, leaves you 2 minutes to bubble for each passage. So you can see the timing you will need for each passage. That all depends on your speed and abilities as you map through the test. Now, the ACT says there are 8 different types of questions on the reading test. Knowing each of these questions isn't going to do you a whole lot of good unless you're really fine-tuning. If you're fine-tuning, you're trying to move from a 33 to a 36, then you want to see if there's particular types of questions that give you trouble. For most students, it's not worthwhile to know all of the types of questions there are. It does help to know the 2 large categories that the passages fall into. There are reference passages, which mostly say according to the passage and refer directly to text in the passages. And there are inference passages in which you have to reason a bit more. But it's important to remember that all questions are supported by evidence from the text. It might be easiest to remember that the inference passages are the odd number passages, passage 1 and 3, prose fiction or lit narrative, and passage 3 is humanities, and the reference passages are the even number passages, passage 2 and passage 4, or the science passages, social science, natural science, sometimes it's called social studies. My recommendation is to do the odds and the evens together. For most students, I recommend doing the odds first, the evens last. But again, that's an individual decision based on the vehicle you're in and the map you're taking. So every answer can be supported with evidence from the text. Pause the video and take a minute to read this short passage. Now let's look at question 2. Question 2 says the narrator considers the weather in Alabama during the summer to be. So if you're someone who is just skimming, picking out keywords, you might pick out childhood memories, floating in the pond, cool. You look over, you see choice H and J, and if you're only skimming, you might choose one of those. But if you read the whole passage, this whole paragraph, it talks about trying to stay cool and the humidity, and it just doesn't seem pleasant. So as you read further, the heat came over me like a blanket, an old unwashed woolen blanket. You know it's going to be choice F or G. But what's the difference between humid and extremely hot, which is choice F, and choice G, which is unbearably hot and miserable? How do you decide between those two? And it really comes down to this one word, unbearable. Unbearable means literally it cannot be borne. And so the person did not get back on the plane and go away. The person did not die. So the person was able to bear it. So the answer has to be choice F, right? Humid and extremely hot. And you might have picked up on the humidity from that. The unwashed woolen blanket that had been soaked in water, that's humidity. But it really comes down to unbearable being the word that changes it. If you have time, process of elimination is a strategy you should definitely use. It helps you to get the correct answer by eliminating all of the wrong answers. Unfortunately, it's not a luxury most students have, as the stressor is partly time. But if you come up on a tricky question, know that this is something you can do, and you can learn to look for how ACT gives you incorrect answers. They state the exact opposite of what is asked. They give a general concept, but something that's irrelevant is maybe relevant to one part of the text, but not the question that is there. If you have time, you can learn to use process of elimination effectively. So I want to go over 3 main strategies I propose for approaching the ACT reading. The first is to read and answer. The second is Google summary and answer. And the third is map and answer. Let's break these down a bit more. So reading and answering is just what it says. And if this is an untimed test, it's a strategy I'm going to recommend for every single student. You read the question, you go to the answers, you look back at the passage to find the correct answer. Unfortunately, timing plays a role, and you may have to decide, does reading and answer work best for you, but you have less passages to read? You may cut it to 3 passages or only 2 passages, because the goal is to maximize correct answers. Or do you need a different strategy to try to get more correct answers? That's something you can only determine through practice. But again, this strategy I think is the best strategy if you have time to do it. It's a big if. So Google summary and answer is the next strategy that I will advocate for. This strategy works well for students that are quickly skimming. You don't have time to read carefully, but you have time to skim. And as you go through, you're going to underline or circle keywords that you notice. And you're going to write 1 to 3 words to summarize each paragraph. That's the Google summary. When you're Googling something on the internet, you don't type long sentences usually. You type 1 to 3 words to determine what you're looking for. So this is a great strategy for those who are skimming or those who find themselves drifting off and losing focus. You read the same thing 2 or 3 times going, oh my gosh, I was just thinking about lunch. And so that's a good strategy for either one. It helps you to focus. And the last strategy is called mapping. This strategy works on the science passages, the even number passages 2 and 4. And it's where, because these are very organized passages, they have topic sentences that flow naturally one to the other. And so you read the first paragraph, the topic sentences, and any target passages. Target passages being, if you read a topic sentence that said, as we just discussed, then you would read the sentence before it to know what was just discussed. It only works in the science passage as well, and it's probably not going to get you 100% of the answers. But if you're running a bit short of time, it's a strategy worth practicing, and we will practice it. Another part of mapping which works for some students is to reorder the questions, putting them in the order in which they appear in the text. This is something you can learn to do in about 30 seconds. And if it helps you, it's worth doing. Again, it may be a strategy that's not worth the time. The only way you know that is if you take the time to practice, and we'll look at how that works. So again, all passages fall into two categories, reference and inference. And you need to understand your method of traveling through those passages. So just to quickly look, this is a prose fiction passage. We'll discuss these more in detail. But prose fiction, really the only strategy that works well is read an answer or Google summary. Mapping doesn't work well, but it does help to understand how they're organized. The left-hand column usually presents some sort of problem, and the right-hand column usually presents some sort of resolution. So as you're looking at questions, you have a basic idea of how the passage will be organized. Natural science passages, remember we discussed the possibility of mapping, where you're going to read the first paragraph, the topic sentence of each paragraph and any target sentences, and then move to the questions. If you just look at what's highlighted, you can save a lot of time by doing that. And again, that's probably going to get you 7 to 8 questions by doing it that way, and we'll discuss how to do that when we really get into natural science. The last type of passage to discuss is called the dual passage, and this one's a humanities passage, but not every dual passage is humanities. It can appear anywhere in the text. You have a passage A and a passage B. The way to approach these is you read passage A, then answer the questions on passage A, read passage B, answer the questions on passage B, and then do the questions that are about both passages. The beauty of this passage is, the dual passage, is that if you don't have time to do the entire test, but you have time to say do 3.5 passages, this could be the half passage. You could do a passage A and answer the questions on passage A, and then you're only guessing on 4 questions as opposed to guessing on 10 questions. In general, reading is the most important skill in the ACT. Even on the math test, ACT a few years ago changed their math questions to make them more challenging by adding reading difficulty. So reading is the most important skill on the ACT. So how do you get better? Well, you practice, practice, practice. It definitely helps if you are a good reader, someone who reads every day. You build your stamina by turning off your device and working on making your attention span longer, but you have to practice these passages. There is no substitute. There's not some rule like you can learn in English with commas or in math. It is a practice section that you have to work at. All right, let's get to practicing. Let me know if you have any questions.